We are recording this for folks who couldn't attend, so welcome if you're joining us after the fact. But for those who are here today, we're so glad you're here. We are Blue Team Alpha, and this is our monthly partner meeting. Today, our conversation is really around the Defender's Dossier. So this is a year in the cybersecurity world, a year in review. We are going to talk about some top threats. We have two very wonderful powerhouses with us today, Mr. Joe Kingland and Dan Wolfford. They will be unraveling some of the biggest cyber threats that came in from 2023, from data breaches to ransomware, business email compromise, insider attacks, all of that stuff. And Dan shared with me, Dan and Joe shared with me that in a recent survey of 1,520 security and IT leaders, the year of 2023 saw a staggering rise in breaches, resembling a freight train. So we don't want to go into all the details because I want to leave that for our esteemed speakers. So stay tuned and we're going to jump into all of this. My name is Sonia Moline. I am the Vice President of Business Development with Blue Team Alpha. I'm excited to be here today as the MC for today's event. So that is me. Enough about me. Let me introduce to you today Mr. Joe Kingland. Mr. Joe Kingland is our CEO here at Blue Team Alpha. He is a former Chief Security Officer for Self-Esteem Brands and also veteran from the United States Submarine Force. Comes to us with a wealth of cybersecurity experience, of course. And a fun fact about Joe, he has flown a RC plane off submarine. Do you want to just let us know what that was like, Joe?
Yeah, well, I'm probably the only person I've ever met or known of that has flown an airplane off the top of a submarine. It was a RC plane, but I mean, just like we had them turn the submarine into the wind, just like on aircraft carriers. We're on the surface, obviously, and then we launched the thing off the top of the deck. It was pretty fun. Landing it didn't go so swell, but it did take off.
Wow, that is cool. Yes, I can say I've never met anyone else who's done that. So yes, very fun fact. Okay, awesome. And then also today we have Mr. Dan Wolfford. Dan is former head of Joint Cyber Intelligence for the U.S. Military Training Mission. And he also is retired from the United States Air Force Cyber Warfare Wing with numerous cybersecurity credentials as well as Joe. So Dan's fun fact, he has been practicing Wim Hof ice water meditation since 2019. Can you tell us what that is, Dan?
Yeah. So Wim Hof is a person. He's an adventuralist. He owns a lot of world records, like climbing Mount Everest with no jacket on. He just had a boot, his boots, shorts, and a hat. And he swims under the ice. Wow. It's very inspirational to me. And in 2019, like right before COVID started, I started doing this type of ice water where you go into ice water up to your neck, and you have to control your breathing, and you really have to focus your mind. And it's it's a very nice way to start the day. Like, take a cold shower and you're amped for 4 or 5 hours.
All right. Well, I like it. That's invigorating. I always lived on the, kind of principle my parents instilled in me. There's no bad weather. There's just bad gear and unpreparedness. So it's like kind of goes against what I know, but I have seen some of the research on that. It's pretty amazing what it can do for your, to invigorate you. So awesome. Well, let's just jump right in. So we have the top threats we saw in 2023 is what we're going to talk about today, as well as best cyber practices to better protect your customers. So we are Blue Team Alpha. Our mission is securing and defending the digital world. We are doing that with integrity, a sense of duty, excellence, and compassion. Those are our core values. We have a lot of services in the cybersecurity space, but today we're really going to talk about this one right here, incident response, and what we've seen in that world. All right, let's hand it over to the top threats that we saw in 2023. I'm going to hand it over to you, Joe, if you want to kick us off. That'd be great.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it. So yeah, you guys are definitely on the right path if you went towards the business email compromise route. Ransomware is definitely in that top three as well. But yeah, business email compromise, no matter what we try to do to work with our clients to get them to do MFA and secure their email environments, it still prevails as the most common threat that we see out there due to social engineering. But yeah, it's definitely the number one just because of its ease of exploitation, really. So the second one, there's a real big uptick this year, this in 2023 in vulnerability exploitations. A lot of vendors, big vendors, had many issues with vulnerabilities, and the attackers really took more time and effort to start to get into those environments using the vulnerabilities, still paired with social engineering in terms of initial attack vectors, but just the amount of what we would consider edge devices or edge services, firewalls, and things like the kernels of VMware that happen to be that attached directly to the internet, just seem to have a lot more prevalence in actually getting compromised and then exploited. So, and ransomware, look, ransomware continues to be something that we talk about. There was really somewhat of what I would consider a lull in ransomware. I would say kind of that towards the end of 2022 and even in the beginning parts of 2023, but it really stormed back throughout the third and fourth quarter of 2023. So there's a lot of information out there about how ransomware in 2023 was basically the worst that it's ever been. So it is definitely very, very much still in play as one of the top three business threats out there. So, all right, what else do we have?
Yeah, and then did you want to go over the social engineering, Dan?
Yeah, I was just thinking, behind every threat is a person. And they might be living in a country that's at war right now, and they can't find a normal job. They get involved in crime. It's unfortunate, but that's the humanity of the problem. That behind every threat is a person. And what they're doing, what we see them do more often than not, is they're attacking another person. And that's social engineering. That's one person trying to outsmart someone that works at the company, like an employee who's trying to be helpful. With the huge attack with Caesars and MGM, it started out with social engineering, people trying to be helpful. For example, the IT desk, the help desk. If I can trick an IT person into thinking that I'm an employee that's locked out and I need help getting back into my system because I have work to do, and they don't want to lose their job. They want to do a good job at providing IT support, so they're going to be helpful. That's we see more attacks start this way than anything else, and it's just the sad state of cybersecurity. There is no good way to prevent that except for awareness and training and teaching employees what to look for and to be suspicious. And I hate to say it, but telling people not to be so nice right off the bat, like do a little bit of background and checking and verification of their location. Are they who they say they are? Because these attacks, they're really good at pretending. And so you have to be aware of that. Now, push bombing, maybe if over the last couple of years, a lot of us have been talking about MFA and 2FA. So the cyber criminals, they figured out a way around it. Even though that's still good security, we're still going to recommend that to have MFA. But there are bypasses to MFA that's focused on push bombing. This happens where you have a notification on your phone that keeps popping up every second. Maybe it's 2 a.m. and you're trying to sleep. You're getting notifications on your phone about your MFA, and people get fatigue. They're getting bombed with these push notifications. Maybe they're not paying attention, maybe they're busy, maybe they're tired, but they click OK. And now they just bypass the MFA. And also, you can add a rogue device to MFA, like on the approved MFA device list. They could try to trick the IT team to add their phone. This cyber criminal's phone gets added to that approved user list, and then they're able to log in as the authorized user. And then, of course, just tricking people by using the name of the company in the domain name. Like if they get an email or if they get a link that says, if they're targeting Caesars and the link says Caesars-sso.com, most employees, they're not going to be able to tell the difference between the real domain and that fake domain. It's really up to the security team or your security provider to try to filter those out. So if it's a new domain that was just created within the last 6 weeks, and they're using some cloud service, and that should be a red flag. And then later on, when we get to the part about data loss prevention, I'll talk about what we can do to try to prevent that.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, let's also talk about some best cyber practices to better protect your customers. And let's just hand this over to you, Joe.
Yeah, so I'm glad we're talking about containerized networks and segmentation, because this is two things. Number one, it's a great opportunity for you guys as partners that are doing network work for your customers, because many clients don't have a good handle on segmentation inside of their networks. I'm a former network engineer myself, so this is I was like, ooh, I get to talk about this one because this is something that I really had a lot of fun with when I was still doing a lot of engineering work. But segmenting the networks is really really critical when it comes down to cybersecurity and just kind of the basics, right? Everybody wants to go out and buy X, Y, or Z tool or thing to try to cover up, like foundational mistakes. And this is one of those foundational mistakes that pretty much everyone has made, right? Myself included back in the day, setting up networks. You set them all up flat, and everybody can talk to everybody. Once you're past the firewall, we're all friends, right? But really, what we need to do is the firewalls are getting easier to get behind. It's been fairly easy, and once you get into the squishy middle part, when you're in the network, you need to continue to make it hard for the attackers to deploy their all of their tools and to gain visibility across the network. And so being able to design the networks for your customers in a way where you are blocking as much both lateral movements, so computers that are on the same network or devices that are on the same network, also blocking in between networks. So if you have a Wi-Fi network and a desktop or a user network, the cabled, right, just old school Cat5, Cat6, segment those two things out away from each other so that the devices can't, one pool of devices cannot just freely talk to another pool of devices. Be specific in what you're allowing those devices to communicate, back and forth with. So that's really, really important, is blocking that that movement as much as possible and restricting that access, because as the attackers come in, and the first thing they do in recon is just do a network scan and see what's out there, see what they can see, and start to figure out the lay of the land. And the more you can help your customers and your clients to segment out those networks so that the attackers have to basically execute multiple attacks, various attacks, a myriad of attacks, right, to get to all of the places in the network. That's going to be that's going to be your best defense. It's going to slow them way down. Some will just give up, right, or just execute a partial attack on a network instead of really trying to get to the whole thing. Because at some point it's a risk reward deal for them, and if the juice isn't worth the squeeze, then they'll just do what they can and kind of move on. So being able to properly segment out your clients' networks is really probably, honestly, like one of the best defenses that you can have, particularly against things like data theft and ransomware, right? These really big nests. So take the time to do it, but it's also just a wonderful opportunity for your for your MSP or MSSP to be able to go in and provide value, show that engineering and architecture expertise that you have, and help your clients really set their networks up to be able to defend themselves. We're at Blue Team Alpha. We're happy to support you guys in those efforts. If if you need information on how segmenting networks really does help reduce risk and prevent widespread attacks.
So let's talk about vulnerability and asset management. Joe, Dan, who wants to jump in on this one? Yeah.
I will. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll at least start it. Dan will hopefully back me up here, but so vuln and asset management. I'll kind of cover asset management first. From an incident response perspective, this is a really simple concept. You can't defend or recover what you don't even know you have. I'm going to give you an example of an IR. This happened a few years back, but I was incident commander on this IR, and we took the call on like a Saturday morning, and I got on with an MSP that was doing their IT, and it was just a small shop, a couple guys. And so I get on the phone with them, and I'm asking them about the lay of the land, the basic stuff, right? I don't know this client from Adam. So I'm asking, how many sites do they have? How many computers do you have? Do you have data centers, servers? Where are these things, right? And I get the answer of, okay, well, we have five sites. There's 40 computers here, 20 computers here, 60 computers here, just kind of lay of the land. And we have servers in these two spots. I'm like, okay, great. So I've got a total rough count of somewhere in 5 sites and about 150 to 200 computers ish, right? We'll throw an ish on there. You never know when you get into these things. You find out as you go. By the time we were done with that incident, there were 18 locations across 3 states, 2 separate companies, but they were interconnected and they both got hit. And the actual computer count was a little closer to 650. They weren't even close, and they had no asset management. They had nothing. There wasn't even as much of it as like an Excel spreadsheet to go off of. They were kind of close with the data center size and the server count. At the end, I think I knew about somewhere around 20, 25, and at the end, I think we're at like 60 or 70. So not a huge discrepancy there, but if you don't actually have a good track of what's in the environment, it's really hard to recover it. And you just, in that instance, I just kept finding out about random stuff, and I get the owner on the phone and just say, okay, like, seriously, how many sites do you have? And their hair's on fire, so they're only thinking of what they have, but they just had nothing written down. The other thing about asset management is a lot of times you think you know what you have, But unless you start, this is a service that you guys can provide as the MSP or MSSPs, or we can help you with, is just doing a simple scan out in the environment and see what comes back. There are a lot of recon tools that will help not only tell you what's in the environment, but help classify the devices, to really get a good idea of what is out in those environments, and just start to get a good handle on what's out there, both that you know about and that things that you don't. So that's certainly the first thing. Dan, do you want to cover anything else on asset management?
Yeah, something that I would add is, out of all of the times that we saw networks get compromised from outside the organization, so it wasn't stolen credentials. It more often than not, it was a device that the organization forgot about, and it was unpatched, still connected to the network, like an IoT device that was listening on IPv6. Even though the organization is not using IPv6 internally, that device is still listening. So the cyber criminals are able to attack, get access to that IoT device, and then able to pivot into the network. And then also systems like servers that are maybe not in production, they were used for development or they were used for testing. They're still attached to the network, but people forgot about them. And you hear people call that shadow IT. And like Mr. Kingland said, scan for it, look for it specifically. When you hire someone to do an external review, pay close attention to the devices that they think might be connected to your network, even though if you're not tracking it and it's not on your list, if some external security party is saying, hey, we think this is in your network, that's the stuff you want to investigate, because those are the systems that are getting compromised.
Yeah. And I mean, really, this stuff it's required to get like business continuity planning done. I mean, if you can imagine, how much slower
standpoint too.
Yeah, you can imagine how much slower the response is, when we go from 5 sites to 18 sites, right? When we're looking at just from our incident teams standpoint, how many people are we going to put on a job, or how many people do we think that it's going to take to recover somebody, in our average amount of time, right? That golden 5 days. So it's, when we're looking at it, if we're multiplying what we initially scoped this at by 3, that's a wildly different incident than what we thought we had in the first place. So, and any business, you really have to know what you've got and how it's being utilized to build your incident response plans, your disaster recovery plans, and then ultimately your business continuity plan. So
yeah, and all that stuff's required for a reason in many industries. And so it's not just to check the boxes and say you did it. It's like, no, seriously, we really want the client to actually do it. And it's not just for compliance sake. It's for all of the things that we just talked about today. So no, that's really good.
In reality, this is cyber incidents are far more likely to happen than fire, flooding, traditional disasters that you think of, right? Those are the traditional disasters are due to your environment. On the internet, you're connected to the world, right? Everybody's connected to you, and people are looking for vulnerabilities, which brings me to vulnerability management. When you're talking to your customers about vulnerability management, there's two things that I would love for everyone to kind of walk away with. The first is that patch management and vulnerability management are related, but not entirely the same. Patch management is things like we were talking about earlier, where you're talking about patching applications, patching hardware, patching operating systems, applying patches, right? Vulnerabilities, while patching is a part of vulnerability management, absolutely, vulnerability management is bigger than that. It's bigger than patching. And I'll give you an example. If one of your customers has an old version of TLS still enabled today, no patch is going to solve that, right? But the old versions of TLS are vulnerable to exploit. You will never see it on a patch report, but it will absolutely show up on a vulnerability report and absolutely should be taken care of. So that's just a really easy example of the difference between like patch management and vulnerability management. Patch, as you're going through patch management or vulnerability management reports, of course you're going to see patches that need to be applied. Absolutely. But it's also going to pay attention to the configurations of the devices, of the operating systems, of the applications. How are they configured? Are they configured in a secure way? Not just are they up to date on their software, right? So that's the difference between vulnerability management and patch management. So it does require effort, right? Vulnerability management does require effort. But the good news is for these companies, these organizations, is that they can outsource that vulnerability management. Blue Team Alpha does it. I'm sure some of you guys do it too, right? So that it can be outsourced, and you can help to show, what those costs, and you can show the return on investment by reducing their risk by hardening the network, right? So it does pay dividends to those companies and those organizations. And what we're seeing, like I said earlier, what we're seeing in the field is that these vulnerabilities that exist and these misconfigurations that exist are being exploited automatically. If you guys remember back Hafnium time, 2021, that was really the first mass exploit that we saw used, right? Like in the wild, like at scale. That was, and it was because it's fully automated. It was a fully automated exploit that went into the wild. But we're seeing more of that. And we will continue to see more of it, especially as AI starts to get more and more involved. Dan, can you think of a recent, like what's probably the most recent example you got on top of your head?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head at the moment.
Like what the VMware one? The VMware was an automated exploit, I believe.
Yeah, there have been a lot of instances where a vulnerability is discovered and then it gets exploited, and then somebody will upload like an exploit script to GitHub, and then somebody takes the exploit and write a script to go out and try it on all possible vulnerable machines. There's a company called Gray Noise. They specialize in this kind of mass exploitation. A friend of mine, he started that company a couple years ago. Originally, they were just looking for noise, like scanning, but they started noticing shortly after vulnerabilities getting discovered, they started seeing mass exploitation attempts across the entire internet. So you have to assume that anything that you put on the internet is getting attacked immediately and constantly.
Yeah.
And the VMware one was particularly bad because it was a remote vulnerability, and it could be exploited remotely with no problem. So we saw thousands of machines getting exploited overnight.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was on a call today with a customer, 250 attorneys, and they specialize in employment law. And so they have all kinds of vulnerable data. They don't know where to start. And we kind of started talking about vulnerability, risk assessment, CISO services from Blue Team Alpha. And the partner was super excited because they had been shopping around a couple different, cyber providers, and they just kept not knowing where to start. And it's like, start somewhere, but definitely starting with vulnerability, asset management, a vCISO agreement to help, oversee all of this stuff. It's pretty complex, but it's important to do something, right? So, well, very cool. So let's just jump right into that. Email security. boy, we did see a lot of business email compromises come in recently. Let's talk about that. Do you want to kick us off, Jim?
I'm going to pass this one to Dan. This is his baby. He loves email so much. He can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I think I'll do a speed run. I'll try to keep it short and sweet. The main point here is that email is not secure. There is no email security. It's a myth. Email security is a myth. So number one, use cloud. Okay, Microsoft, they're even telling people not to use Microsoft Exchange anymore. On-premise email server is asking for trouble. And we just, more often than not, when we see an email system get compromised, it was on premise, it was outdated, unpatched, it wasn't being properly monitored or managed. So use cloud. It's up to date all the time. It's more secure. Yes, there are trade-offs, but it's worth it. The benefit is worth the risk, in my professional opinion. Number two, it's not going to be pretty. Your users are going to hate this, but I recommend text-only email. When you use HTML, yes, it looks better, but the cyber criminals are able to hide all of their malicious code in that HTML, and people are not in the habit of looking at the source code of the email. So if you put your settings by default to use text, you eliminate that entire class of attack where they can't do the code injection and iframe and 1 by 1 pixels. All of that would go away. And then number three is don't use email. If possible, use an alternative. Internally, we use Microsoft Teams, but there are other chat programs that you can use that like Slack or Google's Gchat, just something else that actually has security in mind, that's encrypted, that has access control, and to have all of the employees stay vigilant. And when they do get an email, be suspicious. Double check. Who did it come from? Am I expecting an email from this person? Can I double check? Can I call them on the phone or message them in another way to see if it's real? And the example that I use for this is I was responding to an incident, and the user had gotten an email from a .gov. Now, you would think .gov has good security, but the email just seemed weird. They said, I'm not expecting an email from this person. Can you look into it? So we called that person's office, and the IT department said, hey, that email is compromised. Don't open it. And the only way that we would have, the only way that we were able to detect that email was because the user had that gut feeling. So, that goes back to training and awareness for everybody.
If you guys couldn't tell, Dan's PowerPoint presentations are a white background with black letters. And you're lucky if you get some size variation in the text. But, the thing about using an alternative to email like Slack or Teams or like Ring Central's chat functions, like those kinds of things, is that they're closed systems. You have to be invited to basically get into somebody's tenant, essentially. So when you're able to use those systems, they're not just open to anyone. Like email is basically open. Anybody can email anybody. You can get anything from anyone from anywhere, right? They don't need to authenticate to send you an email. They don't need to do anything besides know your email address and hit send, right? In these internal systems, your customers, everybody has to just invite select people into those, and it's a much safer way to communicate back and forth. So is to use those internal systems. So when Dan says just don't use email, I mean, he means it, but there's some validity to minimizing its use, and certainly not trusting everything, or just having zero trust as into anything that you're getting in through email.
Yeah, don't be so nice. It's hard for the Minnesota nice folks on my team here, but I know we are so vulnerable. Everyone is, you know, so it's like we really want to watch out for our customers. So, and we have a lot of training and stuff like that that we can help with at Blue Team Alpha, and some of our partners have that too. So that's another thing. Um,
If you
all right.
if you
Yeah.
think it's like the old school mail, if you got a letter bomb every day, wouldn't you stop checking the mail at some point? You know what I mean?
Good point. Oh my gosh, yes. I like that. We're gonna put that as the quote of the day for Dan. It's true. Like that is what is happening. And I feel like I have to be a preacher a lot of times with my colleagues and friends and family and you know our customers, but it's what it takes.
We'll do a speed run on DLP, but this is
Okay.
super duper important. Everyone needs to look at this. This was the most common. This was related to all the attacks. Before ransomware, the cyber criminals are stealing the data. Before almost every attack there is, with business email compromise or a vulnerability exploitation, they're trying to steal the data. And this is at the national level as well. They're trying to steal data from the government, from emergency systems, from corporations. They're trying to steal intellectual property. So the top 3 things that I can recommend for everybody to do. Number 1, go look at the guidance from NIST. That's the granddaddy of all standards. They have one specifically for preventing exfiltration. And exfiltration is another word for data loss prevention, for data loss. So NIST 800-53 SC-7 number 10, that whole chapter is devoted to exfiltration. And then number 2, as an alternative, but in addition to NIST, also look at CIS. It's another framework, and they have what's called Implementation Group 3, Safeguard 3.13 is focused on DLP. So you use that as guidance, use that as the framework. Whether or not you're going to get certified in these things or not, still you want to use that as a starting point. Second, the most important thing to do is to have continuous monitoring. And I put a couple of things specifically there in bullet 2A. You want to, whenever you have monitoring set up, specifically look for unmanaged or unknown devices, because data exfiltration is going to be going to some unmanaged or unknown device. They're stealing it, they're pushing it somewhere off the network. Then it's going to look like a backup. More often than not, they're going to use your backup tool and make a backup, but send it to a server they control. So you have to monitor your own backups and other backup alternatives to see if it's like out of band or if it's unusual backup schedule. 3, you can look at the domains to see if it's lookalikes. Like we've seen this with stuff like Google. So if you're backing up to some Google cloud, but then somebody backs up to Google, but it's their personal, it's not your Google business, it's a Google personal account. So it looks the same, or this for anything, whatever backup you're using or whatever kind of system or cloud you're using, if they set up one that looks similar, because they got on the network, they see what you're using, they want to be sneaky and make it look the same. So it'll be similar. And then permissions. If they get on, if a cyber criminal gets onto the network as a user because they stole the credentials, either guessing or phishing, something like that, does that user have permission to be doing backups or to be moving large, like gigabytes of data? So that can trigger a red flag based on the user's access. And then historical, continuous monitoring only works in a small window of time. And depending on how, what kind of solution you have or how much you pay for, you can go look historical to say, all right, we had this user, we think that user account was used to steal data. Let me go back and look over the previous 90 days. And this also works with insider threat. If somebody is disgruntled or they're going to quit, maybe they were stealing data 90 days leading up to their exit. So you really want to be able to look back in time to be able to do some analysis. And then the last one is the patterns. So you're looking for patterns or spikes in traffic. When you're doing continuous monitoring, if there's some kind of pattern developing, like you have a baseline of a certain amount of data, and then all of a sudden you have a spike at a certain time. And it's like that every day of the week. That's normal. But then if you see something out of band or that breaks the pattern, now you go and investigate that suspicious activity. And last thing, these cyber criminals, they're living off the land. That means they're using tools that you already have in the environment. They're not bringing in malware that could trigger an alarm. They're going to use stuff that's already there. And I made a little short list of things that we've seen, like Pulseway, like Splashtop, like TeamViewer, things that customers already have installed to do remote management. The attacker just will hop onto that as a user and start using it to go around and steal data. So
Yeah, to that, we've even
things.
seen people, we've even seen attackers modify the executable that gets pushed out via group policy.
Yeah, group policy is a big one because they go for Active Directory, right? And then now they're the admin. They're going to push out policies to the whole network that could even include ransomware. So the ransomware is getting installed by the group policy.
Yep.
That's fun. Ugh.
Now, if you notice, I don't recommend any DLP tools or solutions. That's a whole nother talk, but also they're not super effective. You know, they trigger on the wrong things, a lot of false negatives. So I didn't want to recommend any tool or solution because there isn't one that stands out as the best right now.
I'm going to talk about next steps because I know everyone's going to jump off right afterwards. So please do attend additional trainings. If there was anything we talked about today and it sparked interest, you have customers, you have ideas, reach out to your channel manager. That's what we're here for. That's what our channel team is here for is to help you and support you run an ad campaign around one of these, or just go through your partner or your customer list and look through those and see, is there any customer that doesn't have a good asset management, plan, an IR plan, a vulnerability scan plan, all of the things. So reach out, please attend our next webinar. It's on February 22nd. We will not move the date. So thanks for those who jumped on and rescheduled to be here today. We really appreciate that. All right, well, stay tuned for our next partner spiff, and we'll see you in February, and we will talk to you all again. And thank you, Dan and Joe. I know you guys are incredibly busy. It was a struggle just to get you both here. I know you have so much going on, so really appreciate you, and we really appreciate all of our partners. I commend you for taking the time out of your busy day just to add a little bit more of this stuff to your brains so that you can help your customers. So have a good one, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Talk to you next time.